Meanwhile, things were brewing at the bishop's palace in Three Rivers. Monsignor Cook had been succeeded by Monsignor Laflèche, who shared his predecessor's esteem for Father Disselet. He had big plans for the pastor of Cap-de-la-Madeleine. As a first step, he invited him to be one of a select group accompanying the bishop to Rome in the summer of 1883. When Father Disselet came back from that trip, he had been made vicar general and promoted to the pastorate of Saint Zéphyrin. This was one of the occasions already referred to when Father Disselet had to beg his bishop to give the more important positions to someone else and leave him where his heart was, at the Cape. The bishop's approval of the shrine is evident from the fact that the first pilgrimage in the history of Our Lady of the Cape came from Three Rivers while they were on the ocean en route for Rome. This means that the arrangements for such a public and semi-official act by a diocesan institution must have been made by the bishop and Father Disselet before their departure. The pilgrimage came on May 7, 1883. It consisted of the entire community of the convent of the Sisters of Providence, under the leadership of Canon Severin Rio, rector of the cathedral. The 150 of them, including the director and the nuns as well as the orphans, made the pilgrimage on foot and received Holy Communion in the Rosary Chapel. This year also saw the beginning of October Rosary devotions in the shrine, which had been holding May devotions ever since the new parish church was opened. The second public pilgrimage was made in June 1884 by the same group plus the other citizens of Three Rivers to the number of 300. Once more they made the return journey. That meant some 10 miles of walking on foot and in prayer. By June 15, 1885, pilgrimage to the Cape had become a citywide affair in Three Rivers. The League of the Sacred Heart sponsored a group of 1,200 persons who made the long walk with banners flying under conditions that must have tried their devotion. The Three Rivers newspaper said in its report the following day, "Neither the wind which blew with violence, nor the pouring rain caused the least hesitation among the Christians who undertook a 10-mile walk to go and pray to Our Lady of the Holy Rosary for the intention of their venerated bishop. Rosary, hymns, and music kept devotion unflagging. The Three Rivers Band marched with the pilgrimage and alternated the best pieces from its repertoire with the chanting of sacred hymns. The local public pilgrimages, small or large, were linked by an increasing stream of individual pilgrims. Continued reports of remarkable favors spread the fame of the shrine from mouth to mouth, and the blessed roses were looked upon as outward signs of the favors Our Lady showered down on Cap-de-la-Madeleine. In 1887, the Cape's leading parishioner brought aid that was to make the Cape accessible to large organized groups other than those of the neighboring towns. Hippolyte Montplaisir had been called from his farming to represent his people in the government of Canada. He had just been elected to his 4th term of office, and he obtained from the federal government a grant of $3,000 to build at the Cape a quay which could receive pilgrimages by water. The work started on October 3rd, and it was not yet finished when the first pilgrimage by boat arrived by Saint Agel de Laval on October 30th, 1887. This opening of a practical way for crowds to reach the Cape from a distance in those days before automobiles and buses was like lifting a barrier. It was evident that the next pilgrimage season would see new groups. The time had come for formal fulfillment of Father Disselet's vow to dedicate the little church to Our Lady of the Rosary. Preparations had already been made. The statue of Our Lady would be moved to the main altar, which would become the confraternity altar. It would be replaced on the side altar by one of St. Joseph, whose feast had brought the Bridge of Rosaries. The decree authorizing translation of the confraternity privileges to the main altar had been obtained under the date of February 14, 1884, a fruit of Father Disselet's stay in Rome. The interior of the old church was to be repaired and brightened up. Father Disselet had gathered wood for the work, and on April 1st, 1888, he called for a corvée and a bee to bring the wood in and get the job started. The floor was torn up and new supports placed under it. The new floor was painted yellow, the nave given a coat of blue. The rosary was freshened up and the main altar gilded. Everything was in readiness for the big day, fixed for June 22nd. Meanwhile, the new season had already brought new organized groups on their first pilgrimage. From Father Desaillet's native parish of Saint Grégoire, the Christian brothers brought the boys from their school, and the pastor, Reverend L.G. Peniton, led a pilgrimage of his convent of the Sisters of the Assumption. Reports of cures and extraordinary favors kept coming in. One received that summer proves how far the fame of the little shrine had already spread. It was a letter from Mrs. Alfred Rivard of Chebogan, Michigan, testifying to the cure of one of her children. On all sides there was evidence enough to satisfy even Father Desaillet's ecclesiastical caution that the little church should publicly and officially be called a shrine. Just 14 days before the day of dedication, Father Frederick arrived back in Canada and reached the Cape in time to take part in the ceremony. This was not by Father Frederick's planning, it was one of those accidents by which Providence so often guides the affairs of men. Father Frederick was a religious who moved at the word of his superiors. It was obedience that took him away from the Cape after his first short visit, and it was obedience that brought him back at this moment, which just happened to be so important. The nature of the ceremonies that day is worth noting. There were no ornate decorations, no banners flying, no bands playing. But the farmers of Cap-de-la-Madeleine stayed home from the fields that day, a Friday, and donned their Sunday best. As many of the workmen as could took the day off. The whole parish was en fête. It was a private feast day of their own, a holy day which they held as an obligation of honor. There were people from outside present, but the crowd that jammed the church to overflowing was basically a solid phalange of the faithful of Cap-de-la-Madeleine. It was as if they had decided, without as much as a word being said to one another, that this was a day set aside for solemn sealing and ratification of the pact Our Lady had made with Cap-de-la-Madeleine, and the Cape with her. It was a day for prayer, a day for humility and gratitude. Its principal preparation had consisted of confession and communion that was virtually general to the parish, an act of reparation, whether deliberate or unplanned, for that empty Wednesday in 1867, and of thanksgiving for all that had followed it. They were all there, the men who had stayed away that Wednesday, the men who had stood outside the church door scoffing at the priest, the men who had worked on the Bridge of Rosaries. Firmin Cadet was there, and Flavian Barassa. But the meaning of the day went back farther than that. It was the closing of a cycle, the last syllable of a sentence written by the Queen of Heaven for all the world to read, the final quiet, firm and undeniable answer to the question of how a fallen away people can be brought back to Christ. Father Desaillet, assisted by deacon and subdeacon, sang the Mass. Father Frederick preached the sermon. We can believe it when we were told that his words so moved his hearers, united in that little chapel of theirs, with one thought and one intention, that they could not help thinking that the Holy Spirit was speaking by his lips. Even today, we are filled with wonder at the authentic zing of prophecy in his words. If Father Desaillet was cautious, Father Frederick was bold. He had lived too long with the supernatural to be hesitant about embracing it when he saw it manifest before him. He said, in years to come, this will be the shrine of Mary. Pilgrims will come from here and from all the families of the parish, from all the parishes of the diocese, and from all the dioceses of Canada. Yes, this little house of God will be too small to contain the crowds that will come to invoke the power and the bounty of the sweet Virgin of the Most Holy Rosary. For Father Desaillet, the day was obviously one that filled his heart to the full, but the humble man was still not at peace from his doubts. Just as he had needed the approval of the Dominican Master General on the quite evident value of his first years of promoting the Rosary, so now, in spite of all that surrounded him, he longed for some reassurance from heaven that he was acting in accordance with Our Lady's desire and not merely following his own will in declaring this little church a place of special honor to Mary. He had prayed that on this day of dedication, he might be given a sign that would set all his doubts at rest and leave his soul in peace. He had asked Father Frederick and Father Duguay to do the same. The day passed, and there was no sign other than the large miracle of an empty church made full by means of the rosary. No sign except the wondrous explanation and fulfillment of more than 200 years of history. No wonderful thing except the simple evidence that the love of Our Lady, the tradition of pilgrimage to her shrines, the recitation of her rosary, had all taken firm root in the New World from the transplanted tradition of old France that was now dead in its own native earth. Father Desailly wanted something else. He didn't know what, perhaps a miracle. But no one threw down his crutches and walked. No blind man lifted his eyes and said, "I see." The ceremonies were finished. The people had gone home. The priests had retired to the presbytery. Then it happened. As so many times before, heaven seemed deaf before proving that it always hears. There was to be no public miracle, no striking demonstration for all the world to see. They had come with the converted parish, with the publicly known favors, with the bridge of rosaries. This was to be an intimate moment of spiritual experience. It was, although neither Father Desailly nor anyone else had any such thought, Our Lady's last blessing on a faithful servant so that he could leave his work on this earth in peace, that it had been well done. The founder of the shrine of Our Lady of the Cape, who was at that moment in the best of robust health, was to die quite unexpectedly just 2 months later, and Our Lady was about to come to him as she once had come to another man in another temple. And Father Desailly would be able to say like Simeon, "Now, O Lord, thou canst dismiss thy servant." The three priests were together that evening. Father Desailly, who had founded the shrine, Father Duguay, who would receive it from his hands and guard it until he could hand it over to the Oblate Fathers, and Father Frederick, who had brought comfort to the one and would be the mainstay of the other. The fact that of the three, Father Duguay was the only one who did not participate in the intimate spiritual favor is amazingly indicative of the good curate's role in the building of the shrine. All along, Father Duguay had been the Martha to Father Desailly's Mary, and he would continue in the same position relative to Father Frederick's dominant zeal. There is a note of pathos in the beginning of Father Duguay's account of what happened that evening. He tells of the arrival of Pierre Lacroix on the evening at 7 o'clock, the sun having still an hour on the horizon. He tells of Father Desailly and Father Frederick taking the man over to pray before the statue of Our Lady of the Rosary. Then he adds, "I saw them enter the church, but I did not go in." I did not go in. We can see him standing there gazing at the church door and then turning back to his duty. Someone had to be on call at the presbytery. For what happened inside the little stone chapel on that evening of its dedication, we have the evidence of all three of the participants. Pierre Lacroix made a sworn statement before a notary on his deathbed years later, a moment, as Father Duguay points out, when one tells nothing but the truth. After Father Desailly's death, Father Duguay made a solemn attestation of the details as he had heard them from the lips of his pastor. Father Frederick described them in an article about the shrine, which occupied the front page of the Montreal La Presse on May 22, 1897. The simplest outline of the sequence of events is contained in Pierre Lacroix's sworn statement. I went into the shrine about 7 o'clock in the evening, accompanied by Monsieur Desailly and Father Frederick. I was walking, supported by them. We went to place ourselves at the communion rail. The priests were kneeling, and I was seated behind them, for I could not take any other position because of my infirmities. After praying for a while, I looked up at the statue of the Blessed Virgin in front of me. Immediately I saw that her eyes were distinctly open in a lifelike manner, as if she were looking over us, towards Three Rivers. I examined this without saying anything. Then Monsieur de Salais, who was at my right, left his place and went over beside Father Frederick. I heard him say, "Do you see it?" "Yes," answered Father Frederick. "The statue has opened its eyes, hasn't it?" "Well, yes, but has it really?" Then I told them that I had been seeing the same thing for several moments. From Father de Salais and from Father Frederick, we get other details about the precautions taken by the two priests against illusion and about their reactions. The accounts have been pieced together so excellently by Mr. Raphael Brown of the United States Library of Congress and an authority on the life of Father Frederick that I feel I can do no better than repeat his composite version. After a few minutes of prayer, with closed eyes, Pierre Lacroix looked up at the lovely features of Our Lady's statue, which the two priests were already contemplating. Suddenly, all three were struck with breathtaking amazement. The face of the statue was becoming visibly animated with life and feeling. In speechless astonishment, they clearly perceived that its normally lowered eyelids were now opening, revealing two remarkably beautiful dark eyes, which looked directly ahead toward the open door and the setting sun beyond. They seemed to be gazed fixedly at some invisible sight to the west, in the direction of Three Rivers, Montreal, and the rest of Canada. Not daring to move or say a word, Pierre Lacroix just stared. But soon the pastor of the Cape could not control his excitement any longer. Getting to his feet, Father de Salais went over the good Father Frederick, who was on Lacroix's left, and exclaimed in an awed whisper, "Do you see it?" "Yes," replied the friar slowly. "The statue has opened its eyes, hasn't it?" "Well, yes, but has it really?" At this point, Pierre Lacroix summoned up enough courage to murmur, "I have been seeing it too for several minutes." But the two prudent priests were not yet ready to accept the phenomenon objectively. They moved around before the altar to make perfectly sure that they were not being deceived by an unusual but natural optical illusion. However, they soon had to admit that no mistake was possible. They were witnessing a truly supernatural marvel. The face of the statue, with its open eyes, had taken on an entirely new appearance as it gazed out over North America. Full of majestic gravity and dignity, as befits a heavenly queen on a historic feast day of lasting significance for the spiritual welfare of a whole people. From their words and their actions, we know that they were profoundly moved and that they held these moments burning in their souls for the rest of their lives. Father Frederick referred to it frequently in the years to come. He once said that the picture of that living countenance was so deeply etched in his mind that were he an artist, he could reproduce it in every overpowering detail. We have read Pierre Lacroix's dying statement. As for Father de Salais, the statue come to life was so real to him that it brought a plenitude of the assurance for which he had been longing and praying. It was the sign he had asked. We could have no better assurance of this than the words to Father de Gay during the short interval between that evening and his death. The words ring with uncompromising finality of a death knell, and in their zealous concern, they are almost harsh. All doubt is gone, as he tells his curate. God wants this work. If you do not do it, you will die, and God will raise another in your place. Father Frederick will help you. It is not without a special design of providence that he is here. There is no room for doubt that each of these three persons were caught up simultaneously in an unforgettable spiritual experience, that they felt themselves in the presence of the supernatural, that they were certain that the Queen of the Most Holy Rosary had before their eyes and in the witness of their understanding hallowed this particular place, this particular statue, with her own presence. It was, as we have said, an intimate occasion. It was an event which by its nature stands beyond any ordinary means of proof, outside the personal attestations we have received with all the fullness and all the solemnity one could wish. But there is another guarantee of the validity of this wonderful happening. a long, continuing, authoritative, and marvelous guarantee that only the irreverent can ignore. A work like the Shrine of Our Lady of the Cape, growing from a small group of people in an unknown country parish to a world-famous shrine, attracting 1 million pilgrims a year, bringing spiritual consolation to hundreds of thousands of good people, approved and encouraged by the highest ecclesiastic authority in Canada and in the Universal Church. Such a work is not founded on an illusion. As to the meaning of the prodigy of the eyes, we can only guess. It was certainly an approbation of Father Disselle's work, Our Lady's seal of approval on the dedication of the once abandoned little church as a shrine of the Holy Rosary. But why those 3 particular people? Father Discelle was the fact of Cap-de-la-Madeleine, a people brought back to Christ through his mother by means of her rosary. Father Frederick was a herald who was to spread that fact to the outside world, a man with a gift for communicating the spiritual, a man with the power of drawing crowds to follow him, a man whose specific job at that moment was to travel the length and breadth of French-speaking Canada, preaching to every congregation he could reach. Pierre Lacroix, an infirm, illiterate, and troubled man, was all the pilgrims who would ever bring their burdens to the shrine. He was why the other 2 were there. To the fact of the shrine and to Father Discelle, Our Lady brought the blessed assurance of her approval. To the future of the shrine and to Father Frederick, she gave a spiritual experience which inflamed his soul and lent fire to his words whenever he spoke of Cap-de-la-Madeleine. To Pierre Lacroix, the typical pilgrim, Our Lady of the Rosary gave a moment of peace and understanding which sent him away with a new strength and a new joy in the will of God. But these are merely human interpretations. All we have as fact is the testimony of the people concerned and the immediate impulse given to the shrine's growth, both in the hearts of the faithful and in the official eyes of the Church. Judging from these, and nothing more, it would seem that Our Lady did smile on Cap-de-la-Madeleine.